And now we cross over to our Oseong for global insight and an in-depth look at important developments in world affairs.
Thanks very much, Morgan. Now it's time for Global Insight, where we connect with experts from around the world on issues making headlines. And as the world suffers a supply chain crisis and various trade disputes amid this coronavirus pandemic, South Korea is also experiencing major constraints to business and trade. Computer chip makers Samsung and SKhainicks have been under pressure to share sensitive information with the US government, which has pledged to reduce its reliance on Asian firms. Meanwhile, within the country, a shortage of imported diesel exhaust fluid, or DEF, is threatening to halt transport and logistics. So the country's top policymakers have been trying to resolve these trade and supply chain related issues over the past few weeks, and we discussed these developments today with Robert Handfield, Bank of America University Distinguished Professor of Supply Chain Management at North Carolina State University, and Anup, SRIVASTAVA, Canada Research Chair of the Haskell School of Business at the University of Calgary. Very warm welcome to you both. And well, to start things off, let's go with you first, Dr. Handfield. Now, making headlines here in South Korea is, again, the shortage of DEF, which is a key liquid solution that neutralizes emissions from the estimated 2 million diesel cargo trucks here in the country. Now, China has put the brakes on exporting the solution due to its own energy crunch. Do you expect China's power shortage to continue throughout the winter? And if so, how is it going to affect logistics around the world?
Well, yes. Well, thank you for having me today. And yes, I think this example shows how interconnected these supply chains really are. And as you pointed out, DEF is feared to disrupt the supply chain in Korea. It's a very common, low-cost liquid. South Korea actually manufactured urea as early as 2011. It's not complex technology. It's made by adding carbon dioxide to ammonia. But the decision was made to outsource it to China and Russia, where they produce coal or natural gas to extract ammonia. And as a result, Korea has become completely dependent on it. And when they decided to limit exports, it of course impacts the transportation sector in Korea, which will definitely impact supply chains and cause supply chain disruptions within Korea, but also likely in other parts of the world. Other parts of the world are very dependent on China, and the coal shortages in China are shutting down production, which is also causing disruptions to all kinds of manufactured parts that are produced in China.
Right, and well, as you said, Korea decided that it would be more cost effective to outsource the production of DEF, but now it looks like local producers might have to reconsider now. And well, Dr. SRIVASTAVA, computer chips, that's also been making the headlines here. They power everything from small wearable devices and mobiles to aircraft and military systems, but they do require the sophisticated technology, and they're currently also in short supply as well. And that's why many governments, including South Korea, the United States and the European Union, they've all announced plans to become major semiconductor producers over the next decade or so. So what really is the strategic importance of having this cutting edge technology?
Hi, Seong. Great to be back in the program. When we last met, we expected that chip shortage will somehow sort itself out in about 6 months' time. Manufacturing will ramp up, demand for electronics will cool down, supply chain issues will disappear. But as we look around, it looks like the problem is here to stay. It has worsened, and it has become almost unmanageable. More important, it is now being looked not just as a consumer goods issue, but also a top national priority for at least two reasons. People now realize that just one Taiwanese company controls about 2/3 of global supply chain, and this fact is not changing anytime soon. So any mishap, such as earthquake, flood, fire, or even water problems at TSMC can halt the entire global supply chains. Second, if China takes control over Taiwan or TSMC, the world would be left scrambling. And finally, this is a very important point. Future wars would be fought with machines, robots, drones, and artificial intelligence, and chips will play a very important role in that theater. So whoever controls the next generation of chips can also become the next military superpower. So that's why you see these spate of announcements from various governments, including Korea, US, European Union, and even India.
And well, US policymakers, they've certainly been taking steps to really ramp up their semiconductor production. And well, the Commerce Department, they've been requesting that companies like Samsung South Korean SKhainicks and Taiwan's TSMC to divulge information about their clients, production volume, inventory levels, all very sensitive information. So really, well, what is the risk of actually sharing this information?
I'm not clear why US government wanted this data and what they can do with this data, at least in short term, and how can it solve the global supply problems. I believe that no company should be asked to reveal its trade secrets or client information or client confidential data unless that company is harming the national interest. Samsung, TSMC, SKhainicks have rightly declined to provide these details. It's not just a question of risk to chip manufacturers, but also to the clients in the whole supply chain. Again, in my view, no company should be asked to provide this confidential data with any government, especially foreign government, period.
Well, many governments they seem to be putting national interest on top of, in front of all these supply chain issues. And well, Dr. Handfield, geopolitical conflicts and these complications, they really haven't helped, least of all the trade war between Australia and China, which has, for example, impacted commodities and solutions, including DEF here in South Korea. And well, do you think global supply chains, particularly in energy-related sectors, will become even more tightly squeezed and complicated due to the geopolitics?
No, absolutely, and that's unfortunate that geopolitics are definitely playing a role. We saw this in the U.S., of course, for a long time with the tariffs that the U.S. was imposing on China, and China was thus imposing tariffs on U.S. Products as well. The ongoing issue you're seeing with coal right now, Australia is one of the primary suppliers of coal for China. And China, therefore, was unhappy with Australia's criticisms of its lack of transparency around the source of the COVID-19 virus and where the origin was. Australia criticized China. China says, well, we're not happy with you. We're going to stop buying your coal and put a stop to that. Even though China was reliant on their coal, they were putting a stop to it. But China is also trying to keep up with the Paris Accord and trying to cut back on the use of coal. And the way the system works is they simply will tell their politicians to stop using coal, and they'll cut off coal, and it'll cut off energy to a lot of manufacturers and cause disruptions all over the world. So there is a follow-on effect that's occurring, which is unfortunate, and we're going to likely see more of that, these geopolitical disputes that end up impacting supply chains. And that's one thing that companies need to be aware of and keep track of what's happening geopolitically now as well, because they are risks that impact their own production.
And definitely South Korean companies, the chip makers, Samsung Electronics and SKhainicks, they've been trying to muddle through this and on the semiconductor front. And Dr. SRIVASTAVA, now these two companies, they've been talking with US Commerce Department officials, and they seem to have reached some sort of understanding that the chip companies will provide second-tier information regarding their businesses in return for instance, Samsung temporarily producing automotive semiconductors in the US, in Austin, Texas. So there seems to be some kind of compromise going on here. What would this second-tier information be?
I think US government asked TSMC and Intel and Samsung, many different companies, not just Korean companies, to provide very detailed data on their sales, inventory status, and clients. They asked them 26 detailed questions. Information was requested on a voluntary basis, but the fact is that all companies have rightfully declined to provide detailed data, particularly on clients. More importantly, I'm unsure how demand for data can force a company to move its production base to a different country. It takes $10 to $15 billion and several years to put up a new semiconductor fab. Companies make such decisions based on demand, technology, profitability, payback period, and risk. No company would change its decision just because the US government starts probing for more information. On the contrary, it is a deterrent, not an attraction to shift your production base.
And Dr. Srivastava, well, some suspected that it was a move to use this information to benefit companies like Intel in the US, but also there was some suspicions that maybe the Commerce Department's demands were made as a means of getting Samsung to produce more of its semiconductors in America. What do you think of this view?
Can you just repeat the last question, please? I couldn't
Sorry,
hear it very well.
So do you think this was perhaps a move by the Commerce Department in the US to get companies like Samsung or TSMC to invest more in America and move their production there?
The Biden administration has been global in many respects than Trump administration. Let's take two concrete examples. It pushed for minimum tax rates for digital giants and created a global consensus on this issue. Recall that Trump was against it. Biden made this move despite the fact that it's going to hurt American companies. Second, he played a more proactive role in Glasgow summit, promised to cut emissions and made unprecedented investments in clean energy. Recall again that Trump pulled out of Paris Accord and blocked a measure that would have increased spending. So Biden has made a clean break from Trump's policies in many respects, but not when it comes to China. It has not only maintained Trump's tariff on Chinese goods, they might even increase further. So in general, Biden has displayed a more global outlook, but a more American-centric views on certain specific needs, such as for China and chips. And I think the fact that US offers such a great market, as it has shown even during pandemic, it remains the world's biggest market. Any foreign company planning to sell its products in US will have to take these facts into account.
Well, it looks like it might be 3 more years of America first then. And well, in terms of the energy crisis, Dr. Handfield, are there ways to overcome or mitigate shortages in countries that are greatly dependent on energy and commodity imports? I mean, what should they really do in the long run to secure these key materials?
Well, I think the most practical approach is to use long-term agreements. We work with one company, Cheniere Energy, out of Houston, that produces liquid natural gas, puts it on ships and sends it across to Korea and China. And they have 25-year contracts of guaranteed supply with these two countries. And it's good for the seller and it's good for the buyer. You have a guaranteed source. I do also think that countries are starting to look around and are starting to look at opportunities to do what I would call nearshoring. That is to start looking at local countries that they are perhaps have neighborhood or relationships with and forming alliances with those. Africa clearly is a big provider of oil, Nigeria. For things like DEF, perhaps it's better to pay a little bit more and have it produced locally and to not be reliant on China. And so I think countries need to look at those strategic commodities that are really important to them and start developing strategies for either nearshoring, reshoring, or forming long-term agreements with providers and countries to ensure the supply of these goods going forward. It's going to be a rocky road ahead. I don't think there's any easy solutions here, by the way.
Oh, well, that leads to the $1 million question, Dr. Handfield. When do you see this crisis ending? And is it going to affect the pace of global economic recovery from the pandemic?
Absolutely, and I've been writing about this in my blogs and so forth. My prediction is that this is going to last well into 2022 and possibly 2023. I spoke with the White House Council of Economic Advisors last week, and these are problems that are going to require solutions and engagement in and investments in infrastructure. We have an infrastructure bill here, but also looking at ports, looking at roads, looking at critical industries, and starting to invest. And these investments take years. They can take 1 or 2 or 3 years. In the short term, we're going to have to deal with these shortages. My prediction is we're going to see a lot of inflation. Prices are going up. Transportation is going up. We're going to see continued shortages of products, which will impact top-line revenue, and we're going to see costs go up. You put that all together, and it's looking oddly like inflation, and I think that's where we're headed.
Well, it looks like we have very testy times ahead in the next year or even beyond that. And well, that was Dr. Robert Handfield at North Carolina State University and Dr. Anup SRIVASTAVA at the University of Calgary. Thank you both so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Sayang. Thanks. Bye.